Okay, so I hope you all had your nap already for after lunch for the first presentation, so you're all awake now. I just quickly want to clarify, it's not my thesis what I'm talking about. My thesis was a different topic. This is just, I'm generally going to tell you, I'll show you, about the clean development mechanism. A lot of people might think, oh, I've heard so much about it already. Some people maybe have never heard about it. So it will just be a very general overview. And I mainly talk about program of activities, which is a kind of new addition to the clean development mechanism. I'll tell a little bit about post-2012 and the climate negotiations. And then I'll give a small case study about a project we're working on in Colombia at the moment with a company I'm working for, GmbH Envest. So for the ones who are not familiar with the whole climate discussions and the climate background, just very quickly, it all starts with the Kyoto Protocol, which basically tells the industrialized countries to reduce their emissions by roughly 5% in the framework of 2008 to 2012 compared to the 1990 levels. So that's taking the industrialized countries into account, but the idea was we also want to somehow help the developing countries in their sustainable development, and they should be integrated in the whole sustainable development and climate change negotiations right from the start. And to make it a bit easier for the industrialized countries, there were 3 mechanisms created. 2 of them are project mechanisms. You can forget about international emissions trading for the moment, and you can also forget about joint implementation because I'm not going to talk about it. But I'm going to talk about the clean development mechanism, which basically is a project mechanism, which, to say it very easily, in developing countries, you can have a project that reduces greenhouse gas emissions under a business as usual level. And the emissions you've reduced in this country can be sold to industrialized countries to meet their target, which is the one up here under the Kyoto Protocol. And the clean development mechanism was working quite well, or it is still working quite well. But it's a lot of larger scale projects that are happening. There were some issues that especially least developed countries weren't integrated into it. So there were long discussions what to do, and right from the beginning they were discussing a program of activities, it's called. How can you get credits for a project you do in a certain sector or with certain projects? So that's the program of activities that has just recently really taken off, and you see the first examples. Just quickly for the ones who couldn't follow while I was talking, that's the clean development mechanism explained. You have a specific place in a host country. This is they call it non-Annex 1 countries. It's basically the developing countries. They don't have any emission target under Kyoto. They can emit theoretically as much as they want to. And that's the greenhouse emissions they're having. And you say, well, in a business as usual development, people would generate their electricity with coal and gas. They have a certain electricity mix. They would like to do something with renewable energies, but of course it's too expensive. They don't have an incentive. Their main incentive is development. It's not especially renewable electricity. So people from Annex 1 parties, which is mainly industrialized countries, can undertake projects in developing countries, often in cooperation with developing countries, and thus reduce emissions in these countries. And the emission reductions are called CERs. It's a detail that's not very important, but they will be then sold to the industrialized countries, and they are basically allowed to emit more. There are a lot of discussions whether it's good or not, but we're not going into that now. It's basically the clean development mechanism was also discussed as maybe a tool for technology transfer. It's not the mean of the CDM to really do technology transfer, but of course it's happening because there's a lot of projects from industrialized countries being implemented in developing countries, and a lot of the projects are in the field of renewable energy. This is from a study from 2008 when there were, I've forgotten the total number, but I think 3,500 projects registered with the UN for the clean development mechanism, and you can see the technologies where a lot of technology transfer was taking place. It's the it's the one that have the least red, because all the red says there was no technology transfer involved at all, and then it's split up between the equipment transfer or just the knowledge transfer, or equipment and knowledge transfer. And it happened a lot in the tidal energy, where is it? Which is very obvious because it's a complicated technology, it's very new, and there are hardly any projects. The black spots, you can see the number of projects. But it's also happening a lot in agriculture projects where it's mainly about methane capture. Then HFCs, it's hydrofluorocarbons, N2O. So it's all the technologies that are a bit more complicated in large-scale projects are transferred. If you look at projects like especially biomass energy, there's some technology transfer, but biomass and biogas, what's happening is that you can use a lot of the equipment that is already in the countries, but then you need to add some parts that maybe the countries don't already have. And what is happening, and it's proven, is that especially in the more common technologies, in the beginning there was a lot of technology transfer, but the more projects happened, especially in one country, I think Brazil, it's an example for landfill gas projects, the less development, the less technology transfer was happening. So basically CDM can be a means of technology transfer, but it doesn't have to. It always depends on the country where you're going to work, and it depends on the technology. Let's go back to the program of activities. Basically, for a CDM project, you used to have single project. It was one project in a country, and you had to register it with the United Nations, and you had to fill in a lot of documents, and it made it quite expensive. You had a lot of transaction costs. So what the idea is now, to have one, they call it program of activities, which is not a project, but it's more the umbrella under which you can have a lot of smaller projects or even larger projects. And under this POA, you have CDM project activities, which is the activity that actually reduces your emissions. Up to now, there's just 11 program of activities registered, which is not very much, but there is 101 under validation. And I'll tell you something about the benefits of program of activities versus CDM projects soon. Just very shortly, there's another thing where you can have a lot of small-scale projects and register them as one project. That's called bundling, which is a bit different than program of activities, just in case you come across that. Because if you bundle a lot of small-scale projects, you have to know right in the beginning which projects you're going to do. You can say, I'm going to do 5 small-scale biogas projects, and they are going to be one project activity. Whereas for the program of activity, you can just say, okay, in general, I want to do biogas projects in Colombia. These are the criteria that work for it, that kind of technology. This is why it's additional. And then you can add projects throughout a lifetime of 28 years to it. You don't need to decide on the exact sites. You just set a geographic boundary where the projects will be. And you don't need to register each of the CPAs under a program of activities, which makes it much easier and which makes it much cheaper as well for a program of activities than single CDM projects. And if you have small-scale projects under bundling, all the small-scale projects that you bundle together have to be still in a small-scale frame, whereas under a program of activities, you can have small-scale projects, and if you take all of them together, they could be above the threshold of small-scale. So basically, as I said, the program of activities, that's a definition from the UN. It's a voluntary coordinated action implemented by an unlimited number of CPAs, which is the CDM program project activities. So which means there is no limit. You can have a program of activities with 100 sub-projects, or you can have a program of activities just with 2 sub-projects. And the CDM project activity is the actual activity you undertake under a POA. This is just to show you the time frame. Normal CDM projects, you register for 10 years or 7 years up to 21 years. Whereas a program of activities, the whole umbrella that gives you a definition of the projects that you can do in a country, is up to 28 years. And then you include, as I've said before, the different program activities that can be 10 years or 3 times 7 years. Depends on what you choose. This graphic is very stable, but basically these blocks, I can show you, they could be everywhere. They don't have to follow in the same time. You could have some that overlap. You could have a gap between 2 project activities.